this episode, we're going to take the ownership ideas from the last lesson and show how organizations make ownership real at scale through governance. Governance can sound like a fancy word for meetings, but good governance is not about creating busy work, and bad governance is not just annoying, it is dangerous. When governance is weak, AI decisions get made informally, different teams make inconsistent choices, and no one can explain who approved what when something goes wrong. When governance is too heavy, people avoid it, work around it, and create shadow AI use that the organization cannot see or control. What we want is governance that works, meaning it creates clear authority lines, predictable decision paths, and enough structure to keep risk under control without freezing progress. The tools that make this possible are often simple. A committee that has the right membership and purpose, a charter that defines what the committee does, and authority lines that clarify who can approve, block, and escalate. By the end, you should be able to explain what AI governance is in plain language, what a functional AI governance committee actually does, and why charters and authority lines are not paperwork but safety rails. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Start with a plain definition of governance that you can use without sounding formal. Governance is how an organization makes decisions, sets rules, and assigns oversight so important activities happen consistently and responsibly. In the AI context, governance means deciding how AI is allowed to be used, what requirements must be met before use, who reviews high-impact cases, and how the organization monitors outcomes over time. It also means setting expectations for documentation, risk assessment, privacy and security controls, and escalation when problems appear. The reason AI governance matters is that AI can influence decisions that affect money, people, trust, and legal exposure, and organizations need a repeatable way to decide what is acceptable. Without governance, teams will still use AI, but each team will invent its own rules and assumptions. That creates inconsistent risk, surprises, and conflict, because what is acceptable to one team might be unacceptable to another. Governance is the mechanism that turns good intentions into consistent behavior. A governance committee is one common way organizations implement oversight, but beginners should understand that a committee is not the goal. It is a tool. A good AI governance committee exists to make sure key decisions are reviewed by the right mix of perspectives and that those decisions align with organizational risk boundaries. The committee is also a place where disputes can be resolved, like when a business team wants to deploy a use case quickly, but risk teams need additional evidence. The committee should not be a catch-all that reviews every minor AI feature, because that creates bottlenecks and encourages workarounds. Instead, it should focus on the decisions that matter most, usually the high-impact and high-risk uses, plus the rules that shape everything else, like policy and standards. The committee should also sponsor the overall governance process, ensuring there is a clear intake path for new use cases and a clear process for ongoing monitoring and reporting. When the committee has the right scope, it becomes an accelerator of safe adoption rather than a blocker. To make a committee work, you need the right membership, and membership is really about perspectives rather than job titles. The committee should include business representation, because business owners understand the purpose of the use case and the real-world impact if it fails. It should include technical representation because technical teams understand limitations, operational constraints, and what evidence can realistically be produced. It should include risk and compliance representation because these functions help ensure consistency, defensibility, and alignment with organizational risk practices. It should include legal and privacy representation when AI touches regulated decisions or personal data, because those risks can be severe and non-negotiable. It should also include security representation because AI systems are still systems and threat-driven concerns matter, especially when data and access are involved. The point is not to create the largest group possible, but to ensure that the voices needed to make balanced decisions are present, especially when the use case is high impact. A committee missing key perspectives tends to approve risky decisions unintentionally, and a committee with too many people tends to move too slowly. A charter is what keeps a committee from turning into a vague discussion group, and beginners should think of a charter as a rulebook for how the committee earns trust. A charter explains the committee's purpose, what decisions it owns, what decisions it influences, how it escalates, and how it measures success. It also defines meeting cadence, required documentation for submissions, and how decisions are recorded. Most importantly, it defines authority lines, meaning whether the committee can approve, whether it can block, or whether it can only recommend. This matters because if authority is unclear, teams will ignore the committee or treat it as optional advice. A charter also protects the committee itself because it prevents scope creep where every new concern gets thrown into the committee's lap. When a committee has no charter, it often becomes inconsistent and political because decisions depend on who shows up and how persuasive they are in that moment. A clear charter makes governance predictable, and predictability is what makes teams willing to engage with it. Authority lines are where governance becomes real, and this is an area that shows up often in exam-style thinking. Authority lines clarify who has the decision right to approve a use case, who can require changes, and who can stop deployment when requirements are not met. In some organizations, the governance committee has direct approval authority for high-impact AI use cases. In others, it provides review and recommendation, and a senior executive sponsor has the final sign-off. What matters is that the organization knows which model it uses and that the process is documented and consistent. Authority lines also include the idea of veto power for certain requirements, like privacy or security, when legal obligations or baseline controls are not satisfied. If privacy requirements are not met, it may not be acceptable to proceed, regardless of the business benefit. If minimum security controls are not met, the system may not be safe to deploy. Clear authority lines prevent the dangerous pattern where teams shop for approval by asking different people until someone says yes. A practical way to understand governance is to think in terms of a funnel. Many AI ideas start wide, with teams experimenting or proposing new uses, but only some should move into production, and the ones that do should meet clear requirements. Governance is the funnel mechanism that screens use cases, classifies impact, routes high-impact ones to deeper review, and allows low-impact ones to move faster with standard controls. The governance committee sits at a key point in that funnel, especially for the cases that could cause serious harm. The charter defines what counts as high-impact and what evidence is required. Authority lines define who can make the final decision at each stage. When governance is well-designed, teams can predict what will happen when they submit a use case, and they can plan accordingly. When governance is poorly designed, teams avoid it, and then the organization loses visibility over what AI is actually being used. Governance also includes the concept of guardrails, which are policies and standards that set boundaries so decisions do not have to be reinvented each time. A policy might define what kinds of AI use are prohibited, what kinds require approval, and what kinds are allowed with standard controls. Standards might define documentation requirements, monitoring expectations, and evidence needed for fairness and performance. The committee often owns the maintenance of these guardrails because policies and standards must evolve as the organization learns and as external expectations change. Without guardrails, every use case becomes a negotiation, and negotiations are slow and inconsistent. With guardrails, the organization can move faster because many decisions are already made, and the committee can focus on the genuinely difficult cases. This is why governance is not just about a meeting. It is about establishing reusable rules that reduce uncertainty. For beginners, this idea is important because it shows governance as a way to scale responsibility, not as a way to create obstacles. Another key function of governance is ensuring decisions are documented in a way that supports accountability and learning. When an AI use case is approved, the organization should be able to show what risks were identified, what controls were required, who owns the risk, and what monitoring will be used to detect problems. This documentation is not meant to be a long essay. It can be concise, but it must be clear and consistent. Documentation supports audits, supports incident response, and supports continuity when people change roles. It also helps prevent repeated mistakes because teams can review past decisions and see what worked and what did not. A governance committee that does not record decisions is like a steering wheel that turns but does not connect to the wheels. It creates motion without control. Clear records make governance credible, and credibility makes teams take it seriously. In exam thinking, documentation often appears as the difference between a weak and strong answer because it ties together accountability, evidence, and defensibility. We should also address the risk of governance theater, because some organizations create committees and charters that look good on paper but do not change behavior. Governance theater happens when the committee has no real authority, meets irregularly, or is bypassed routinely. It also happens when the committee becomes purely reactive, only discussing issues after incidents rather than guiding decisions before deployment. Another form is when the charter exists but is ignored and decisions are made based on politics instead of criteria. Governance theater increases risk because it creates a false sense of safety, leading leadership to believe AI is controlled when it is not. For beginners, the warning sign is simple. If teams do not know how to submit a use case, if approvals are inconsistent, or if no one can point to who has authority to stop a risky deployment, governance is not working. Real governance creates known paths and enforceable boundaries. Effective AI governance also needs a relationship with leadership because some decisions are too important to be made at lower levels. High-impact AI uses may require executive visibility because they can affect reputation, legal exposure, safety, and strategic direction. A working governance model includes escalation paths, meaning clear triggers for when a decision must be elevated. It also includes a sponsor or leadership line that supports the committee when it needs to say no or slow down a risky proposal. Without leadership support, committees can be pressured to approve questionable use cases, especially when the business benefit is loud and the risk is subtle. Leadership support also helps with resources, because monitoring and documentation require effort, and governance cannot succeed if teams are expected to do everything with no time or tools. In risk programs, tone from the top matters because it shapes whether governance is treated as real or as optional. A charter alone cannot overcome a culture that rewards speed at any cost. To make all of this feel concrete, imagine a simple high-impact use case, like using AI to influence eligibility for a service. A working governance process would classify this as high-impact, require a formal submission, and route it to the committee. The committee would review purpose, data sources, limitations, evidence of performance, fairness considerations, privacy and security requirements, and monitoring plans. The charter would define what evidence is required, and authority lines would define who can approve and who can block if requirements are not met. The decision would be recorded with clear ownership and conditions, like requiring human review or restricting the AI's role to recommendations rather than final decisions. Monitoring expectations would be set so drift and bias can be detected over time. This is not about perfect control. It is about disciplined oversight that makes risk manageable and decisions defensible. Beginners should see how committee, charter, and authority lines work together to turn a risky proposal into a controlled, accountable deployment. To close, AI governance that works is governance that is clear, proportional, and enforceable. A committee is useful when it focuses on high-impact decisions, includes the right perspectives, and operates with a clear charter that defines scope and responsibilities. A charter turns governance from a vague discussion into a predictable decision process, and authority lines ensure that decisions are respected and not bypassed. Guardrails like policies and standards reduce repeated negotiation and allow faster, safer adoption by making expectations reusable. Documentation makes governance visible and defensible, while leadership support ensures the committee can act when risk is high. When governance is effective, it does not slow the organization down. It prevents chaotic decisions and expensive harm that would slow it down far more later. This governance foundation will support our next topics, where we align AI use cases to strategy and define risk boundaries leaders can defend.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.